The muddy water of Clearwater Creek had never looked so threatening as it did that Tuesday afternoon in March, when three small voices would change everything. Jake Patterson thought he knew about courage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jake Patterson had been working the same stretch of Montana rangeland for 37 years, ever since his father handed him the keys to the old Ford pickup and said, "Son, this land will teach you everything you need to know about life, but only if you're willing to listen." The Broken Arrow Ranch sprawled across 8,000 acres of rolling hills and creek bottoms, where generations of Patterson cattle had grazed under the endless big sky. On this particular Tuesday, Jake was mending fence along the eastern boundary when he first heard the commotion. The March snowmelt had turned Clearwater Creek into a rushing torrent, something that happened every spring like clockwork. But this year felt different. The winter had been brutal, with record snowfall piling up in the mountains, and now all that frozen water was making its way downstream with a vengeance. Jake's horse, Thunder, a 17-year-old quarter horse with more sense than most people, suddenly lifted his head from the sparse grass he'd been nibbling. The horse's ears swiveled forward, alert to something Jake couldn't yet hear over the sound of rushing water. "What is it, boy?" Jake murmured, setting down his wire cutters and straightening in the saddle. Thunder had saved his life more than once over the years, alerting him to everything from rattlesnakes to sudden weather changes. The horse never got excited over nothing. That's when Jake heard them, children's voices, high and desperate, cutting through the afternoon air like knife blades. He couldn't make out the words yet, but the panic in those young voices made his blood run cold. Jake touched his heels to Thunder's sides, and the horse immediately broke into a ground-eating lope toward the sound. They crested a small hill, and Jake could see the creek below, swollen to 3 times its normal width. The water that usually babbled peacefully over smooth stones now roared like an angry beast, carrying debris, fallen branches, and chunks of ice downstream at terrifying speed. 3 children stood on the bank, and even from a distance, Jake could see they were in distress. As he got closer, he could make out their words, and what he heard made his heart stop. "Help! Please, somebody help!" The oldest child, a boy who couldn't have been more than 12, was jumping up and down, waving his arms at Jake. "Mama's in the river. She fell in, and we can't swim." Jake's eyes immediately went to the churning water. About 50 yards downstream, he could see a flash of blue fabric, a woman's jacket, bobbing in and out of the current. She was fighting to keep her head above water, but Jake could tell she was losing the battle. The creek was carrying her away fast toward a section where it narrowed and deepened, bordered by steep banks and fallen trees. When did she fall in? Jake shouted as Thunder slid to a stop near the children. "Just now," the boy yelled back. "She was trying to get our ball that fell in the water, and the bank gave way." Jake's mind raced. The woman had maybe 2 minutes before the current carried her into the narrow section, where the overhanging branches and debris would make rescue nearly impossible. After that, the creek disappeared into a dense thicket of willows and cottonwoods that stretched for miles. The 3 children looked up at him with tear-streaked faces. The oldest boy had dark hair plastered to his forehead and wore a Denver Broncos t-shirt that was too big for his thin frame. Beside him stood a girl who looked about 10, her blonde hair in pigtails, clutching a smaller boy who couldn't have been more than 6. All 3 wore the kind of second-hand clothes that suggested their family didn't have much money to spare. "What are your names?" Jake asked quickly, already calculating distances and angles in his head. "I'm Danny," the oldest boy said. "This is my sister Emma and my little brother Tyler. Please, mister, you have to help our mama." Jake looked at the raging creek again. The woman was still visible, but she was getting farther away by the second. Thunder stood perfectly still beneath him, As if the horse understood the gravity of the situation, in his younger days, Jake might have spurred Thunder right into that creek without a second thought. But at 55, with a bad knee from a bull riding accident and shoulders that ached every morning, he knew he had to be smart about this. One wrong move, and these 3 children would lose both their mother and the only person who might be able to save her. "Danny, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Jake said, his voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. "Take your brother and sister and run up to that hill over there, the one with the big cottonwood tree. Can you see it?" Danny nodded, his eyes wide. "Good. From up there, you'll be able to see the whole creek. I'm going to try to get to your mama, but I need you to watch and yell directions if you see her. Can you do that for me?" "Yes, sir." Danny grabbed his siblings' hands. "Come on, guys." As the children ran toward the hill, Jake assessed his options. The creek curved in a wide S-shape through this section of the valley. If he could get Thunder to the right spot downstream, they might be able to intercept the woman before she reached the dangerous narrows. Jake had rescued livestock from floods before, but never a person, and never in water this violent. Thunder, though, had been through flash floods, blizzards, and every kind of emergency the Montana wilderness could throw at them. If any horse could handle this, it was Thunder. "All right, boy," Jake said, patting the horse's neck. "We've got work to do." Thunder's ears flicked back, listening to his rider's voice, then forward again toward the creek. The horse seemed to understand that this was different from their usual work. This wasn't about cattle or fence repairs. This was about something much more important. Jake guided Thunder along the bank, looking for the best spot to enter the water. The creek was moving too fast for a straight rescue. He'd have to think like the water, anticipate where it would carry the woman, and get there first. From the hill, Danny's voice rang out. "I can see her. She's by the big rock." Jake spotted the landmark, a boulder the size of a pickup truck that stuck out of the water about a quarter-mile downstream. The woman was still fighting the current, but Jake could see she was weakening. Her movements were becoming less coordinated, more desperate. Thunder picked his way carefully down the muddy bank, his hooves finding solid footing where Jake's eyes saw only treacherous mud and loose rocks. The horse had an uncanny ability to read the ground, to know exactly where to step even in the worst conditions. As they got closer to the water's edge, Jake could hear the woman calling for help, her voice barely audible over the roar of the creek. She was a young woman, probably in her 30s, with long dark hair that streamed behind her in the current. Even from a distance, Jake could see the fear in her eyes. The water was shockingly cold when Thunder stepped into it. Jake felt the horse tense momentarily as the icy current hit his legs, but Thunder was a ranch horse through and through. He'd crossed this creek hundreds of times in all kinds of weather and water levels, but this was different. The current immediately grabbed at Thunder's legs, trying to sweep them downstream. The horse planted his feet wide and moved forward slowly, feeling for solid footing with each step. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured. "Take your time." The water rose quickly as they moved toward the center of the creek, first to Thunder's knees, then to his chest. Jake could feel the horse's powerful muscles working against the current, fighting to maintain their position. From the hill, Danny's voice carried across the water. "She's coming toward you. She's by the dead tree now." Jake looked downstream and saw the woman clinging to a partially submerged cottonwood. She'd managed to grab onto one of its branches, but the current was pulling at her with relentless force. Her face was pale with cold and exhaustion. "Ma'am," Jake called out. "I'm coming to get you. Just hold on." The woman's head turned toward his voice, and Jake saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. But he also saw how weak she was becoming. Her grip on the branch was slipping. Thunder continued his methodical advance through the rushing water. The creek bottom was treacherous, smooth rocks, hidden holes, and debris that could trap a horse's legs. But Thunder seemed to have a sixth sense about where to step. They were almost within reach when disaster struck. The branch the woman was clinging to suddenly snapped with a sharp crack that echoed across the water. She disappeared beneath the surface for a terrifying moment, before bobbing back up, sputtering and gasping without the branch to anchor her. The current immediately began carrying her downstream again, toward the narrow section where rescue would become impossible. Jake made a split-second decision. He urged Thunder forward, no longer worried about careful footing. They had seconds, not minutes. Thunder responded like the champion he was. The horse lunged forward through the water, his powerful hindquarters driving them ahead of the current. Water splashed over Jake's boots and up Thunder's sides, but the horse never faltered. The woman was only 20 feet away now, but she was moving fast in the center current. Jake guided Thunder at an angle, trying to intercept her path rather than chase her downstream. "Ma'am," Jake shouted, "I'm going to throw you a rope. Can you catch it?" The woman nodded weakly, treading water with movements that were becoming increasingly sluggish. Hypothermia was setting in fast in the snowmelt cold water. Jake pulled his lariat from his saddle horn, the same rope he'd used to catch thousands of cattle over the years. But cattle were one thing. A drowning woman in a raging creek was something else entirely. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He built a loop and prepared to throw, calculating the lead he'd need to account for the current's speed and the woman's position. Thunder stood rock steady in the rushing water, as if he understood that any movement could throw off Jake's aim. The woman was 15 feet away. 10 feet, 5 feet. Jake made his throw. The rope sailed through the air in a perfect arc, but the woman's numbed fingers couldn't grasp it properly. The lariat slipped through her hands like water, and Jake watched in horror as the current swept her past Thunder's position. "No!" Danny's voice cracked from the hilltop, raw with desperation. Jake didn't hesitate. He coiled the rope with practiced speed and spurred Thunder downstream, parallel to the bank. The horse responded immediately, his hooves finding purchase on the rocky creek bottom as they moved through the shallower water near the shore. The woman's head disappeared beneath the surface again, then emerged 20 yards ahead, her movements growing weaker with each passing second. Jake could see the exhaustion in the way her arms moved, no longer the strong strokes of someone fighting for their life, but the feeble motions of someone whose body was shutting down from cold and fatigue. Thunder splashed through a shallow section where the creek widened, then plunged back into deeper water. The horse's breathing was becoming labored, his nostrils flaring with each breath, but he never slowed. Jake had seen this determination in Thunder before, during a wildfire evacuation when they'd spent 18 hours moving cattle to safety, during a blizzard rescue when they'd found 3 missing calves in a snowdrift. The horse had an almost supernatural ability to sense when lives were at stake. "There!" Emma's voice joined her brother's from the hill. "She's caught on something." Jake looked ahead and saw what the girl meant. A massive log had fallen across the creek at its narrowest point, creating a temporary dam of branches and debris. The woman had been swept against this natural barrier, and for the moment, the current was holding her there instead of carrying her downstream. But Jake could see the danger immediately. The pressure of water and debris against the log was enormous. If it gave way, and it would sooner rather than later, everything trapped behind it would be swept downstream in a violent rush that no one could survive. Thunder reached the logjam just as Jake heard the ominous creaking of stressed wood. The fallen cottonwood was shifting under the pressure, its root ball grinding against the creek bank. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Jake called out. The woman's eyes opened, unfocused but aware. My children, double quote," she whispered through blue lips. "They're safe," Jake assured her, "but I need you to help me help you. Can you grab onto my stirrup?" She was pressed against the log by the current, only her head and shoulders above water. Jake maneuvered Thunder as close as possible, extending his left leg toward her. I can't feel my hands," she said, her voice barely audible over the rushing water. Jake looked at her fingers where they gripped a branch. They were white as bone, completely numb from the icy water. Even if she could reach his stirrup, she wouldn't have the strength to hold on. The log creaked again, louder this time. Jake estimated they had maybe 30 seconds before the whole jam collapsed. Without hesitation, Jake swung down from Thunder's back into the waist-deep water. The cold was shocking, even through his thick jeans and boots. He could only imagine how the woman felt after being submerged for so long. "What's your name?" he asked, reaching for her. "Sarah. Sarah Martinez," she managed. "Well, Sarah, I'm Jake Patterson, and we're going to get you out of here." He wrapped his arms around her waist. "But first, I need you to let go of that branch." Fear flashed in her eyes. "I can if I let go. "Trust me," Jake said firmly. "I've got you." Sarah's frozen fingers released their grip, and immediately the current tried to sweep them both away from the log. But Jake had anticipated this. He'd positioned himself upstream from Thunder, and now he let the current carry them back toward the horse. Thunder stood perfectly still as Jake struggled through the water with Sarah's limp form. The woman was conscious but hypothermic, her body no longer able to help in its own rescue. "Easy, boy," Jake gasped as he reached Thunder's side. The horse lowered his head, as if trying to help. Getting Sarah onto the horse was going to be nearly impossible. She was dead weight, and Jake was fighting both the current and his own numbing extremities. But as he struggled to lift her, he heard something that made his blood freeze. A deep, rumbling crack echoed across the water. The log jam was failing. "Jake!" Danny screamed from the hill. "It's breaking apart." Jake looked over his shoulder and saw the massive cottonwood beginning to roll. When it went, it would release not just the trapped water, but tons of debris, rocks, branches, and smaller logs that had been building up behind the dam. There was no time for careful maneuvering. Jake grabbed Thunder's saddle horn with one hand and Sarah with the other, then hauled himself up with strength he didn't know he still possessed. Sarah came up with him, draped across Thunder's neck like a sack of grain. "Go, Thunder, go!" The horse needed no encouragement. He lunged toward the bank just as the log jam exploded behind them. The sound was like a freight train derailing, the roar of released water, the crash of falling timber, and the grinding of rocks and debris. Thunder's hooves scrambled for purchase on the muddy bank as a wall of water and debris surged past, where they'd been standing just seconds before. The horse climbed steadily upward, carrying his double burden with the same determination that had made him legendary among the local ranchers. They reached solid ground just as the flood crest passed beneath them. Jake slid down from Thunder's back, then carefully lifted Sarah down. She was unconscious now, her lips blue and her breathing shallow. The three children came running down from their observation post, tears streaming down their faces. "Is Mama okay?" Tyler asked, his 6-year-old voice trembling. Jake knelt beside Sarah and checked her pulse. It was weak but steady. "She's going to be fine," he told the children, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. "But we need to get her warm and get her to a doctor." Danny pulled off his Broncos t-shirt without being asked. "Here, for Mama." Emma was already untying her sweatshirt. "Mine too." Jake wrapped the children's clothes around their mother, then looked around. His truck was parked nearly a mile away, back where he'd been mending fence. Sarah needed medical attention immediately, but moving her that far in her condition could be dangerous. That's when he remembered the old line shack. Every rancher in this part of Montana knew about the abandoned shepherd's cabin that sat on the ridge above Clearwater Creek. It had been built in the late 1920s by a Basque sheep rancher, and had served as shelter for countless hunters, hikers, and ranchers caught in bad weather over the decades. More importantly, Jake remembered that someone, probably the Forest Service, had stocked it with emergency supplies a few years back. "Danny, Emma, Tyler," he said, lifting Sarah as gently as possible. "We're going to take your mama to a warm place where we can take care of her. I need you three to be very brave and help me, okay?" The children nodded solemnly. Jake managed to get Sarah back onto Thunder, positioning her in front of the saddle where he could hold her steady. The horse stood perfectly still during the awkward mounting process, as if he understood that his passengers were fragile cargo. The ride to the line shack took 20 minutes that felt like hours. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling incoherently about her children. The three kids walked alongside Thunder, taking turns holding onto the stirrups. "Tell me about your family," Jake said to Danny, partly to keep the boy distracted, and partly to learn more about the people he was trying to help. "We just moved here from Denver," Danny explained, breathing hard as he tried to keep up with Thunder's steady walk. "Mama got a job at the diner in Millfield. We were living in our car for a while, but now we have a little apartment above the hardware store." Jake nodded, understanding more than the boy probably intended to share. The Martinez family was starting over, probably running from something or someone, trying to build a new life in a small Montana town where people minded their own business and didn't ask too many questions. "How did you end up at the creek?" Jake asked. "It was such a nice day," Emma chimed in, "and Mama said we could have a picnic. We found a good spot by the water, and Tyler was playing with his ball. It went in the water," Tyler added sadly. "I didn't mean for it to go in the water. Mama said she'd get it," Danny continued. "She said the water didn't look too deep. But when she stepped on that rock, it was all slippery and she fell backward." Jake could picture it perfectly. A young mother trying to retrieve her son's ball, not realizing how deceptive the spring-swollen creek could be. One moment of lost footing, and she'd been swept into a nightmare. The line shack appeared through the trees, a small log structure with a stone chimney and a corrugated metal roof. Jake had sheltered here during storms before, and he knew it. Was basic but functional. Getting Sarah inside required all of them working together. The children held the door open while Jake carried their mother to the single bunk built into the far wall. Someone had left sleeping bags and blankets stacked on a shelf, and Jake quickly spread them out. "Emma, can you help me get your mama out of these wet clothes?" Jake asked. "Danny, I need you to look for matches and see if we can get a fire started in that stove." The cabin had obviously been maintained by someone who understood emergencies. There was a supply of split firewood stacked beside the wood stove, along with kindling and newspapers for starting fires. A shelf held canned goods, a first aid kit, and other basics. Danny proved surprisingly competent at fire building. Within minutes, he had a small blaze crackling in the stove. The warmth began to fill the small space immediately. Jake found himself in an awkward position, trying to help Sarah without compromising her dignity. Emma, despite being only 10 years old, seemed to understand the situation and helped her mother out of the wet clothes while Jake turned away and focused on warming blankets near the fire. "Her skin is so cold," Emma said, worry evident in her voice. Jake had dealt with hypothermia before, mostly in cattle during harsh winters. The key was gradual warming. Too fast, and you could trigger cardiac problems. "That's normal," he assured the girl. "We're going to wrap her up warm and let her body heat come back slowly." Once Sarah was dressed in dry clothes from the emergency supplies and wrapped in warm blankets, Jake checked her pulse again. It was stronger, and her breathing seemed less labored. "Danny," he said, "I need you to do something very important. Do you think you can ride Thunder back to where my truck is parked and bring it here?" The boy's eyes widened. "I have never ridden a horse before. Thunder's the gentlest horse in Montana," Jake said. "And right now, he's the fastest way to get help for your mama." The truck has a radio, and I can call for an ambulance. Danny looked at his unconscious mother, then at his younger siblings, then back at Jake. Something in his face changed, the look of a boy who was realizing he might need to become a man before he was ready. "Tell me what to do," he said. 20 minutes later, Jake watched Danny disappear through the trees on Thunder's back, sitting straighter in the saddle than many adults Jake had known. The boy had listened carefully to every instruction and had shown no fear when Thunder moved into his smooth, ground-covering lope. Back in the cabin, Sarah's condition was slowly improving. Her breathing was stronger, and some color was returning to her face. Emma sat beside her mother's bunk, holding her hand and talking softly about everything that had happened. "You were so brave, Mama," she was saying. "And that man Jake, he rode his horse right into the water to save you. It was like something from a movie." Tyler had found a deck of cards in the supplies and was building elaborate structures with them on the floor, seemingly content now that his mother was safe and warm. Jake stood by the window, watching for Danny's return and thinking about the strange turns life could take. This morning, his biggest concern had been a broken fence wire. Now he found himself responsible for a family he'd never met, in circumstances he'd never imagined. But as he looked at the 3 children, Danny's courage, Emma's devotion, Tyler's resilience, Jake realized that some responsibilities chose you, rather than the other way around. In the distance, he could hear the rumble of his truck's engine, getting closer. Danny returned with Jake's truck just as Sarah's eyes fluttered open for the first time since the rescue. The 12-year-old had managed the mile-long ride like a seasoned cowboy, and Thunder looked pleased with his young rider as they approached the cabin. "Mama," Emma cried, squeezing her mother's hand, "you're awake." Sarah tried to sit up, confusion clouding her features as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. What happened? Where are we?" "You fell in the creek, ma'am," Jake said gently, kneeling beside the bunk. "You've been unconscious for about an hour. We're in an old line shack up on the ridge. How are you feeling?" Sarah's memory seemed to come back in fragments. Her hand went to her throat and she winced. "Cold. I remember being so cold. And the water. She looked around at her children with a growing alarm. "Are you all okay? Nobody else fell in?" "We're fine, Mama," Danny sighed, still breathing hard from his ride. He looked older somehow, as if the responsibility of the last hour had aged him. "Tyler and Emma and me, we're all fine. This man saved you." Jake used his truck's radio to contact the volunteer fire department in Millfield, requesting an ambulance meet them at the main road. While they waited for the medical response, he learned more about the Martinez family situation. Sarah had indeed moved from Denver 3 weeks earlier, fleeing an abusive relationship that had drained their savings and left them homeless. The job at Mickey's Diner in Millfield paid minimum wage, but it came with the small apartment upstairs and the promise of a fresh start. "I wanted to give them a normal childhood," Sarah explained, her voice still weak but growing stronger. "Danny's been the man of the house for too long. He shouldn't have to take care of everyone." Jake glanced at the boy, who was helping Tyler rebuild his card tower. "Seems to me he's got good instincts. Not many kids his age could have handled thunder the way he did." "I wasn't scared," Danny said, though his voice suggested otherwise. "Thunder's a good horse. He knew where to go." The ambulance arrived 40 minutes later, along with Fire Chief Bob Hendricks, whom Jake had known since high school. Bob took one look at the situation and shook his head. "Jake Patterson, I should have known you'd be in the middle of something like this," he said with a grin. "Can't you rescue a cat from a tree like normal people?" While the paramedics checked Sarah's vital signs and prepared her for transport, Jake found himself in a quiet conversation with Chief Hendricks about the family circumstances. "They don't have insurance," Bob said quietly. "New in town, mother working at Mickey's. This ambulance ride and hospital stay could bankrupt them before they even get started here. Jake nodded, already thinking. In small Montana towns, people took care of their own, but the Martinez family hadn't been there long enough to establish those connections yet. "What's the damage likely to be?" he asked. "Couple thousand minimum. Maybe more if they keep her overnight for observation, which they should." Sarah was conscious but still weak when the paramedics loaded her onto the stretcher. She grabbed Jake's hand as they prepared to lift her into the ambulance. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, tears starting in her eyes. "If you hadn't been there... "No need to thank me," Jake replied. "Just focus on getting better. Your kids need you to be healthy." As the ambulance pulled away, Jake found himself alone with 3 children who were suddenly looking at him with uncertain expressions. Danny stepped forward, clearly trying to be the responsible one. "Mr. Patterson, sir, we don't have a car or anything. Our apartment is in Millfield, but I don't know how we're supposed to get back there." Jake looked at the 3 kids, Danny trying so hard to be grown up, Emma still clutching her mother's wet jacket, Tyler building card houses if nothing unusual had happened. The responsible thing would be to drive them to town and drop them off at their apartment. But something about the situation didn't sit right with him. "Tell you what," he said finally. "Why don't you 3 come back to my place tonight? I'll call the hospital and check on your mama, and tomorrow we'll figure out the best way to get you back to town." The Broken Arrow ranch house sat in a valley, surrounded by rolling hills, a 2-story log structure that Jake's grandfather had built in 1952. It had been designed for a family, with 4 bedrooms upstairs and a kitchen large enough to feed a crew of ranch hands. For the past 15 years, since Jake's wife Mary had died of cancer, it had been far too big for one man and his border collie. Rex. The children were subdued during the drive, processing everything that had happened. But as they pulled up to the ranch house, Tyler pressed his face to the truck window with the first smile Jake had seen from him. "Look at all the horses," the boy exclaimed. In the main corral, a dozen horses grazed peacefully in the evening light. Beyond them, cattle dotted the hillsides like scattered brown and black seeds. "Are those all yours?" Emma asked. "Every one of them," Jake confirmed. "Been building this herd for 30 years. Danny was quiet, but Jake could see him taking in everything: the well-maintained buildings, the expensive-looking equipment, the sheer size of the operation. The boy was learning to evaluate situations quickly, probably a skill developed during the difficult months in Denver. Rex bounded out to greet them as they climbed out of the truck, his tail wagging enthusiastically. The border collie immediately made friends with the children, seeming to sense that they needed comfort. Inside the house, Jake realized he faced a challenge he hadn't considered. He had no idea how to take care of children. The refrigerator contained leftovers from his bachelor meals, nothing appropriate for kids who'd had a traumatic day. "Are you hungry?" he asked. All 3 nodded, and Jake opened the refrigerator to survey his options. Leftover chili, a couple of steaks, some questionable-looking casserole, and not much else. "I'll tell you what," he said. "How about we order some pizza from town? I think Mickey's Diner delivers this far." While they waited for dinner, Jake showed the children around the house. Danny was fascinated by the collection of rodeo trophies and belt buckles that lined the mantelpiece, relics from Jake's younger days when he'd competed in bull riding and calf roping. "You were a real cowboy?" the boy asked. "Still am," Jake replied, "just older and smarter than I used to be." Emma discovered Mary's piano in the living room and ran her fingers across the keys, producing a melancholy chord that seemed to match the evening's mood. "Do you play?" Jake asked. "Mama taught me a little," Emma said softly. Before things got bad in Denver, Tyler had found Rex's collection of tennis balls and was playing fetch in the backyard, his laughter carrying through the open windows. It was the first completely happy sound Jake had heard from any of them, The pizza arrived just as the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed to stretch forever. They ate at Jake's kitchen table, which hadn't hosted a family meal in more years than he cared to count. "Mr. Patterson," Danny said during dinner, "what's going to happen to us if Mama has to stay in the hospital for a long time?" It was a mature question from a 12-year-old, and Jake could see the weight of responsibility that the boy carried. Danny was already thinking ahead, planning for contingencies, trying to protect his siblings. "Your Mama's going to be fine," Jake assured him. "And whatever happens, we'll figure it out together, okay?" After dinner, Jake called Millfield General Hospital and spoke with the attending physician. Sarah was stable but would need to stay overnight for observation. Her core body temperature had dropped dangerously low, and they wanted to monitor her for any complications from hypothermia. The children took the news quietly. They'd learned not to expect easy solutions to their problems. Jake made up beds for them in the upstairs rooms. Danny in what had been Jake and Mary's son's room before the boy had left for college and never moved back. Emma in the guest room that Mary had always kept ready for visitors who rarely came, and Tyler in the small room that had been intended as a nursery, but had never been used for that purpose. As he tucked Tyler into bed, the 6-year-old looked up at him with serious eyes. "Is Mama really going to be okay?" he asked. "She's going to be fine," Jake promised. "She's tough like you." "Are you going to take care of us?" The question caught Jake off guard. He'd been thinking in terms of one night, maybe two, until Sarah was released from the hospital. But looking at Tyler's hopeful face, he realized the children were thinking about something much bigger. "For as long as you need me to," he heard himself say. In Emma's room, the 10-year-old was sitting up in bed, staring out the window at the star-filled Montana sky. "It's so quiet here," she said. "In Denver, there were always sirens and cars and people yelling. Does the quiet bother you?" Jake asked. Emma shook her head. "It's nice. It makes me feel safe." Danny's room was the hardest. The 12-year-old was clearly exhausted but fighting sleep, probably afraid that if he let his guard down, something else terrible would happen. "You did good today," Jake told him. "Taking care of your brother and sister, riding thunder to get help. Your Mama should be proud." "I was scared," Danny admitted quietly. "When Mama fell in the water, I didn't know what to do. I thought... I thought we were going to lose her." Jake sat on the edge of the bed, remembering his own childhood fears, his own moments of feeling responsible for things beyond his control. "Being scared doesn't make you weak," he said. "It makes you human. But you didn't let the fear stop you from doing what needed to be done. That's what courage really is." After the children were settled, Jake sat on his front porch with Rex at his feet, looking out at his land under the starlight. The day had started with fence repairs and ended with 3 children sleeping in his house, and their mother in the hospital. He thought about Mary, gone 15 years now, and what she would have said about the situation. She'd always wanted children, had dreamed of filling the big house with the sounds of family life. Cancer had taken her before they'd had the chance. "What do you think, girl?" he asked aloud, as if she could hear him. "Am I crazy for getting involved in this?" The wind through the cottonwoods sounded almost like an answer, not words, but something that felt like approval, like Mary telling him to follow his heart the way she always had. Inside the house, he could hear one of the children moving around, probably getting a drink of water or using the bathroom. Normal sounds of a family settling in for the night. Sounds of the old house had been waiting years to hear again. Jake stayed on the porch until the last light disappeared from the children's windows, thinking about the strange turns life could take and wondering what tomorrow would bring. In the distance, a coyote howled, and thunder whinnied softly in response from the corral. The ranch felt different tonight, not just quieter, but fuller somehow, as if it had remembered what it was meant to be. Jake woke before dawn, as he had every mourning for 37 years, but the sounds greeting him were different. Instead of just Rex's gentle snoring and the distant lowing of cattle, he could hear the soft breathing of children sleeping upstairs and the occasional creak of bed springs as someone turned over. He dressed quietly and made his way to the kitchen, where he started a pot of coffee and began planning the day. The morning chores still needed doing. Horses fed, cattle checked, and 100 other tasks that kept a ranch running. But now he had 3 children to consider, and he wasn't sure how to balance his responsibilities. Tyler appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:30, his hair sticking up in impossible directions, and clutching a stuffed elephant that Jake hadn't noticed the night before. "Good morning, partner," Jake said softly. "You're up early." "I heard the horses," Tyler said, pressing his face against the kitchen window. "They're making noise." Jake looked outside and saw Thunder and the other horses moving restlessly in the corral. Something had them spooked, probably a coyote or mountain lion passing nearby during the night. "Want to help me feed them?" Jake asked. Tyler's face lit up with excitement. "Can I?" They walked to the barn together in the crisp morning air, Tyler staying close to Jake's side. The boy peppered him with questions about everything they saw. Why did that cow have spots? What made the rooster so loud? How did Jake know which horses were which dot in the barn? Jake showed Tyler how to measure out the proper amount of grain for each horse. The 6-year-old took the job seriously, carefully counting scoops and asking Jake to double-check his work. "Thunder gets extra because he worked hard yesterday, right?" Tyler asked. "That's right," Jake confirmed, impressed by the boy's reasoning. "He earned it." When they carried the feed buckets to the corral, Thunder approached the fence and lowered his head toward Tyler. The boy reached up tentatively and patted the horse's nose. "He's so soft," Tyler whispered, as if speaking too loudly might break. The magic of the moment. Danny and Emma found them there 20 minutes later, both dressed in the same clothes from yesterday, but looking more rested than they had the night before. "How's Mama?" was Danny's first question. Jake had called the hospital before coming outside. "She had a good night. The doctor says she can probably come home later today if her temperature stays normal." Relief flooded both children's faces. But Jake noticed that Danny still looked worried about something. "What's on your mind, son?" Jake asked. Danny glanced at his siblings, then back at Jake. "It's just ... where are we going to go? I mean, after Mama gets out of the hospital. We don't have much money, and if she can't work for a few days." It was a conversation Jake had been dreading, but he'd made his decision during the sleepless hours before dawn. "How would you feel about staying here for a while?" he asked. "Just until your Mama gets back on her feet and you all get settled in town." Emma's eyes widened. "Really? We could stay here?" "If that's what you want," Jake said. "There's plenty of room, and I could use the help around the ranch." Tyler was already planning. "Can I help feed the horses every day?" "Every single day," Jake promised. But Danny still looked uncertain. "We can't pay you anything." "And we don't." "Want to be ... what do you call it ... charity cases?" Jake knelt down to Danny's eye level. "Son, after what I saw yesterday, the way you took care of your brother and sister, the way you rode Thunder to get help, I'd be honored to have you working alongside me. This wouldn't be charity. This would be a partnership." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a vehicle coming up the ranch road. Jake recognized the rumble of Dr. Elena Vasquez's pickup truck before he saw it. Elena had been the local veterinarian for 15 years and had become one of Jake's closest friends since Mary's death. "Jake Patterson, what have you gotten yourself into now?" Elena called out as she climbed out of her truck. She was a compact woman in her 40s with graying black hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from wrestling cattle and delivering foals in all kinds of weather. "Word travels fast," Jake said with a grin. "Bob Hendricks called me this morning. Said you pulled a woman out of Clearwater Creek and now you're playing foster parent to her kids." Elena's eyes took in the three children with professional assessment. These must be the famous Martinez children. Danny stepped forward and extended his hand. I'm Danny, ma'am. These are my sister Emma and my brother Tyler. Elena shook hands gravely with each child. I'm Dr. Vasquez. I take care of all the animals around here, including Jake's horses. I hear Tyler's been helping with the morning feeding. Thunder's my favorite, Tyler announced. He saved Mama. Thunder's a good judge of character, Elena said. If he likes you, you must be okay. While the children went back to watching the horses, Elena pulled Jake aside for a quiet conversation. Are you sure you know what you're doing? She asked. Taking in 3 kids is a big responsibility, Jake. You've been a bachelor for 15 years. I can't just abandon them, Jake replied. You should have seen them yesterday, Elena. They've been through hell, but they're still fighting. They remind me of you and Mary when you were starting out, Elena finished. I remember those days. You two were so broke you were eating beans and rice for every meal, but you never gave up on this place. Jake nodded. Mary had believed in taking risks for the right reasons, in opening their hearts and home to people who needed help. She'd wanted children so badly, and fate had given Jake 3 who desperately needed someone to believe in them. What does their mother think about this arrangement? Elena asked. I haven't talked to her about it yet, Jake admitted. I'm driving into town this morning to bring her home from the hospital. I'll ask her then. Elena studied his face for a long moment. You're falling for them already, aren't you? All 3 of them. Jake didn't answer directly, but Elena had known him long enough to read the truth in his expression. Just be careful, she said softly. I know you've got a big heart, but these kids have been hurt before. Don't make promises you can't keep. After Elena left to check on a sick horse at a neighboring ranch, Jake loaded the children into his truck for the drive to Millfield. The small town sat in a valley 20 miles from the ranch. Population 847, according to the sign on the outskirts. Main Street consisted of a dozen businesses: Mickey's Diner, Garrison Hardware, the First National Bank, a feed store, and a few other establishments that had been serving the local ranching community for decades. The Martinez family's apartment sat above Garrison Hardware, accessible by a narrow staircase on the building's side. Jake parked in front of the diner and studied the building. It was old but well-maintained, with a large apartment that took up the entire second floor. Through the windows he could see basic furniture and signs that a family was trying to make the space into a home. It's not much, Danny said quietly, following Jake's gaze. But it's better than sleeping in the car. The hospital was a small facility that served the entire county, more of an extended clinic than a full medical center. They found Sarah in a room on the second floor, looking much better than she had the day before, but still pale and weak. My babies, she cried when she saw her children, tears streaming down her face as she hugged them each in turn. I was so scared something had happened to you. We stayed at Mr. Patterson's ranch, Emma said excitedly. He has horses and cattle and a dog named Rex, and Tyler got to help feed Thunder this morning. Sarah looked at Jake over her daughter's head, and he could see the questions in her eyes. They'd need to talk privately about the arrangement he was proposing. Dr. Rebecca Chun, the attending physician, was young but thorough. She explained that Sarah's core body temperature had returned to normal, and her vital signs were stable. However, she strongly recommended several days of rest and limited activity. No lifting anything heavier than 10 pounds, Dr. Chun instructed. No strenuous activity for at least a week. And if you experience any chest pain, difficulty breathing, or irregular heartbeat, you need to come back immediately. Jake could see Sarah doing mental calculations, how many shifts she'd have to miss at the diner, how much money they'd lose, how they'd manage the rent and groceries. The stress was written clearly across her face. After the doctor left, Jake asked the children to wait in the hallway while he talked to their mother. "Mrs. Martinez," he began, "I'd like to make you an offer." Sarah tensed, and Jake could see wariness in her eyes. She'd probably heard plenty of offers from men over the years, most of them with strings attached. "I've got a big house that's been too empty for too long," Jake continued. "Room for you and your children to stay while you recover and get back on your feet. No strings, no obligations. Just neighbors helping neighbors." "I can't accept charity," Sarah said firmly. "We've always made our own way." "It wouldn't be charity," Jake replied, echoing what he'd told Danny earlier. "I could use help around the ranch, cooking, light housework, helping with the books. You could work off your keep, and the kids could help with chores appropriate for their ages." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying Jake's face. "Why would you do this for strangers?" Jake thought about Mary, about the children they'd never had, about the dreams they'd shared of filling their house with the sounds of family life. "Because sometimes strangers are just family you haven't met yet," he said simply. It took another hour of gentle persuasion, but Sarah eventually agreed to a trial arrangement. She would bring the children to the ranch for 2 weeks while she recovered, and they'd see how things worked out. The drive back to the ranch was different from the trip into town. The children chattered excitedly about showing their mother around, pointing out landmarks they'd learned that morning. Sarah was quiet, but Jake could see her taking in the wide open spaces, the clean air, the sense of peace that permeated the valley. "It's beautiful," she said softly as they turned into the ranch drive. "I'd forgotten places like this existed." That evening, Jake watched from his porch as the Martinez family explored their temporary home. Sarah moved slowly but seemed to gain strength with each hour. The children showed her everything Jake had shared with them: the horses, the cattle, Rex's favorite hiding spots. At dinner, cooked in Jake's kitchen but prepared largely by Sarah despite his protests, the conversation flowed more easily than it had the night before. Sarah told them about growing up on a small farm in Colorado before life had taken her to Denver and into circumstances she preferred not to discuss in detail. "I always wanted to come back to country life," she said, "but I never thought I'd get the chance." "Well," Jake said, raising his coffee cup in a mock toast, "here's to second chances." As they clinked cups around the table, even Tyler with his glass of milk, Jake felt something shift in his chest. The house felt alive again, filled with the warmth and chaos of family life. Later, after the children were in bed, Jake and Sarah sat on the front porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear Montana sky. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly, "for saving my life, for taking care of my children, for all of this." "Thank you for trusting me with them," Jake replied. "They're remarkable kids." "They've had to grow up too fast," Sarah said, sadness creeping into her voice. "I want them to have a chance to just be children again." Jake looked out at his land, thinking about the future. 2 weeks had seemed like a reasonable trial period when he'd suggested it, but already he was hoping it would turn into something longer. "They will," he promised. "This place has a way of healing people. Give it time." In the distance, thunder whinnied softly, as if agreeing with his master's words. The ranch felt complete tonight in a way it hadn't for 15 years. The first real test of their arrangement came 3 days later, when Jake discovered Danny behind the barn at 5 in the morning, trying to saddle Thunder with tears streaming down his face. "Whoa there, partner," Jake said gently, approaching slowly so he wouldn't startle either the boy or the horse. "What's going on?" Danny's hands shook as he struggled with the heavy saddle. "I have to go back to town. There's something I forgot at our apartment, something important." Jake could see the desperation in the 12-year-old's movements, the kind of frantic energy that came from panic rather than purpose. "What did you forget?" Danny's voice broke as he answered. "Mama's medicine. She has these pills she takes. For her nerves, you know. She ran out yesterday, but she's trying to pretend she's okay. But I can see it in her hands. They're starting to shake again, like they did in Denver when things got really bad. Jake's heart clenched. He'd noticed Sarah seemed more anxious the past day or two, but he'd attributed it to adjusting to their new situation. Now he understood there was something medical involved. "Danny, you can't ride Thunder to town by yourself. It's 20 miles, and half of it's on county roads with truck traffic." Jake gently took the saddle from the boy's hands. "But I can drive you there. We'll go together." Relief flooded Danny's face. "You won't tell Mama I said anything? She gets embarrassed about the medicine. She says it makes her seem weak." "Taking medicine doesn't make anyone weak," Jake assured him. "It makes them smart for taking care of themselves. Come on, let's go get your mama what she needs." The drive to Millfield gave Jake insight into the Martinez family's recent struggles that Sarah hadn't shared. Danny explained how his mother's anxiety had worsened during the final months in Denver, triggered by escalating threats from Tyler's father, a man Danny referred to only as him with the kind of venom usually reserved for discussing rattlesnakes. "He used to call Mama names when she took her pills," Danny said, staring out the truck window at the passing countryside. "Said she was crazy. Said he'd use it against her if she ever tried to take us away from him. That's why she stopped taking them for a while, and that's when everything got really bad." Jake gripped the steering wheel tighter, anger building in his chest at the thought of someone tormenting Sarah and her children. "But she's taking them again now?" "Yeah, ever since we left Denver. She says they help her think clearer, help her be a better mama. But we only had enough money for a few days' worth when we got to Montana." At the pharmacy in Millfield, Jake learned that Sarah's prescription had indeed run out, and she hadn't had the money to refill it. The pharmacist, an elderly man named Harold Pitch, who'd known Jake for decades, discreetly handled the transaction without making a big deal about Jake paying for medication that wasn't his. "That Martinez woman's been working hard at Mickey's," Harold mentioned as he counted out pills. "Comes in during her break sometimes, looking at the prices of things her kids might need. Never buys anything she can't afford, but you can see her doing the math in her head." On the drive back to the ranch, Danny was quiet until they were almost home. Then he said, "Mr. Patterson, are you going to send us away when the 2 weeks are up?" The question caught Jake off guard. "What makes you think that?" "Because everybody always does, eventually. In Denver, we stayed with Mama's friend Lisa for a while, but then Lisa's boyfriend said we were in too much trouble. And before that, we stayed with Mama's cousin, but she had her own problems." Danny's voice was matter-of-fact, as if he'd learned to expect disappointment. "People are nice at first, but then they get tired of us." Jake pulled the truck over to the side of the road and turned to face the boy. "Danny, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I'm not going to get tired of you, any of you. This ranch has been my home for 37 years, and it's big enough for all of us for as long as you want to stay. But what if we mess up? What if Tyler breaks something, or Emma gets in trouble at school, or I do something stupid? Then we'll deal with it, like families do," Jake said simply. "Making mistakes doesn't get you kicked out of a family. It just means you're human." When they returned to the ranch, Sarah was waiting on the front porch, her anxiety evident in the way she kept wrapping and unwrapping her arms around herself. Her relief when she saw Danny was palpable. "Where were you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "I woke up and you were gone, and I thought ... I asked Danny to help me with an errand in town," Jake interjected smoothly, handing Sarah the pharmacy bag. "Figured he was old enough to be my navigator." Sarah looked at the medication, then at Jake, understanding passing between them. "Thank you," she said quietly. And Jake knew she wasn't just talking about the pills. The next few days brought a rhythm to ranch life that felt surprisingly natural. Sarah proved to be an excellent cook and took over meal preparation despite Jake's protests. Emma discovered Mary's old sewing machine and spent hours creating clothes for a collection of dolls she'd found in one of the upstairs closets. Tyler appointed himself chief assistant to every ranch operation, shadowing Jake during morning chores and afternoon fence repairs. But it was Danny who surprised Jake the most. The boy had a natural affinity for working with cattle and horses. That couldn't be taught. He could read animal behavior instinctively, anticipating when a cow might bolt or when a horse was favoring a sore hoof. "You've got the gift," Jake told the boy one afternoon as they worked together to treat a cut on one of the mare's legs. "Some people spend years learning what you just seem to know." Danny's face flushed with pride. "Really? You think I could be a real rancher someday?" "Son, you already are a real rancher. You just need time to grow into it." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a black sedan that looked distinctly out of place on the ranch road. Jake felt his stomach tighten as he recognized the type of vehicle. Official, probably government. The man who got out of the car was tall and thin, wearing a suit that probably cost more than most ranchers made in a month. He carried a briefcase and had the kind of carefully neutral expression that Jake associated with bad news. "Mr. Patterson? I'm Agent David Morrison from Child Protective Services. I need to speak with you about the Martinez children." Sarah appeared on the porch, having spotted the official vehicle from the kitchen window. Her face had gone pale, and Jake could see her hands starting to tremble again. "Is there a problem, Agent Morrison?" Jake asked, moving to position himself between the man and Sarah. "We received a report that 3 minor children are living here without proper documentation or background checks. I need to verify their living situation and ensure their safety." Jake's mind raced. Who would have reported them? The family had barely interacted with anyone in town except for the hospital staff and a few people at the diner. "The children are guests in my home," Jake said carefully. "Their mother is recovering from a medical emergency." "I understand that, Mr. Patterson, but when minor children are involved, we have protocols to follow. I'll need to interview each child separately and inspect their living conditions." Sarah stepped forward, her voice shaking but determined. "My children are fine. We're not staying here permanently, just until I can get back on my feet." Agent Morrison's expression softened slightly. "Ma'am, I'm not here to cause trouble, but I have to do my job. There are procedures for this kind of situation." The next 2 hours were among the most stressful of Jake's life. Agent Morrison interviewed each family member separately, inspected the house from top to bottom, and filled out what seemed like dozens of forms. The children were obviously frightened, remembering similar visits in Denver that had led to threats of separation. Finally, Agent Morrison closed his briefcase and faced Jake and Sarah on the front porch. "Everything appears to be in order," he said. "The children are clean, well-fed, and clearly happy. The living conditions are excellent." He paused, studying Sarah's anxious face. "However, I do need to make some recommendations." Jake's heart sank, expecting the worst. "First, if this arrangement is going to continue beyond the immediate emergency period, we'll need to formalize it with proper documentation. Second, the children need to be enrolled in the local school district. Third, Mrs. Martinez, you'll need to establish yourself as a legal resident of Montana." Relief flooded through Jake. These were manageable requirements, not insurmountable obstacles. "How long do we have to get these things sorted out?" Sarah asked. 30 days should be sufficient," Agent Morrison replied. "I'll be back for a follow-up visit, but based on what I've seen today, I don't anticipate any problems." After the agent left, the family gathered in the kitchen, emotionally drained from the experience. Tyler crawled into Sarah's lap, while Emma sat close beside her mother. Danny stood near Jake, as if drawing strength from the rancher's presence. "Are they going to take us away?" Tyler asked in a small voice. "No, sweetheart," Sarah said, stroking his hair. "We just need to do some paperwork, that's all." But Jake could see the fear still lingering in all their eyes. They'd been through this before, and official visits rarely led to good outcomes in their experience. "You know what I think?" Jake said, settling into his chair at the kitchen table. "I think Agent Morrison just gave us a roadmap for making this arrangement permanent, if that's what everyone wants." Sarah looked at him sharply. "Permanent?" "Well, the 2 weeks are almost up," Jake said with a slight smile, "and I've gotten used to having help around here." "Good help is hard to find." Emma's face lit up. "Does that mean we can stay? Really stay? If your mama thinks it's a good idea." Jake replied, "This place is big enough for all of us." Danny stepped forward, his expression serious beyond his years. "What if that man was right about background checks and stuff? What if there are things about us you don't know?" Jake met the boy's eyes steadily. "Danny, I know everything I need to know. I know you're brave and responsible. I know Emma is kind and creative. I know Tyler has a good heart and loves animals. I know your mama is strong and devoted to her children. What else could possibly matter?" Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. "Jake, you can't just take on a ready-made family. It's too much to ask." "You're not asking," Jake pointed out. "I'm offering. There's a difference." That evening, after the children were in bed, Jake and Sarah sat on the front porch again, this time planning a future instead of just surviving. "The present. The school thing won't be a problem," Jake said. "Millfield Elementary is small but good. The kids will fit in fine. And I can probably get more shifts at Nikki's once I'm fully recovered," Sarah added. "Maybe eventually save enough to get our own place." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Or maybe you don't need to get your own place. Maybe this could be your place too." Sarah studied his face in the starlight. "Jake, you barely know us. What if this doesn't work out? What if we drive each other crazy after a few months?" "Then we'll figure it out as we go," Jake replied. "But I have a feeling we're going to be just fine." In the distance, thunder whinnied softly, and Rex lifted his head from where he'd been dozing at Jake's feet. The sounds of night creatures filled the air, owls calling, coyotes singing, the rustle of wind through the grass. "It's so peaceful here," Sarah murmured. "I'd forgotten what peace felt like." Jake smiled, thinking about how the ranch had felt complete again since the Martinez family had arrived. "Peace is just another word for home," he said. "And this is home, for as long as you want it to be." The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks into what had become the Martinez family's permanent residence at the Broken Arrow Ranch. Jake was in the barn checking on a pregnant Mari when Sarah's scream cut through. The morning air like a blade through silk. He ran toward the house, his heart pounding, expecting to find one of the children hurt. Instead, he found Sarah standing in the kitchen, the cordless phone clutched in her white-knuckled grip, her face drained of all color. "Sarah, what's wrong?" She looked at him with eyes full of terror, the same look she'd had in the creek that day, but worse. "He found us," she whispered. "Brad found us." Jake didn't need to ask who Brad was. In the week since the family had moved in, Sarah had slowly revealed more details about Tyler's father, a man whose charm had initially attracted her, but whose true nature had emerged gradually, like a slow-acting poison. Brad Hutchinson was a mechanic from Denver with a history of domestic violence and a talent for tracking down women who tried to leave him. "What did he say?" Jake asked, gently taking the phone from Sarah's trembling hands. "He knows where we are. He knows about you, about the ranch." He said ... Sarah's voice broke. "He said he's coming to get Tyler. He said no judge in Colorado would let me keep his son away from him." Danny appeared in the kitchen doorway, having heard his mother's cry. His face went hard when he saw her distress. "Is it him? Is it Brad?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak. Danny's jaw clenched with an anger that looked far too old for his 12-year-old face. "What does he want?" "He wants Tyler," Sarah managed. He's filed some kind of custody papers in Colorado, says he has rights. Jake felt his own anger building, not the hot, explosive kind, but the cold, calculated fury of a man who'd learned to channel rage into action. Does he have legal custody? No, Sarah said quickly. I have sole custody. But Brad's been out of jail, and sometimes he cleans up his act just long enough to fool social workers and judges. Emma and Tyler had appeared in the kitchen now, drawn by the tension in their mother's voice. Tyler, still innocent at 6 years old, didn't understand the danger. Emma, at 10, understood enough to be frightened. Mama, who was on the phone? Tyler asked, tugging at Sarah's shirt. Sarah knelt down and pulled her youngest son into her arms, fighting back tears. Nobody important, baby. Just somebody who made a mistake. But Jake could see the fear in her eyes, the terror of a mother who might lose her child to a system that didn't always protect the innocent. After the children were settled with morning cartoons in the living room, Jake and Sarah retreated to the kitchen for a strategy session. Sarah explained that Brad had a pattern. He would disappear for months at a time, then suddenly resurface with legal threats and demands for access to Tyler. He doesn't really want Tyler, Sarah said bitterly. He wants control over me. Tyler is just the leverage he uses. What happened the last time he pulled this? Jake asked. Sarah's hands shook as she poured coffee. We were living with my cousin in Colorado Springs. Brad showed up with papers from some lawyer, demanding overnight visits with Tyler. My cousin got scared and asked us to leave. That's when we ended up homeless, living in the car. Jake processed this information, his mind already working on solutions. Sarah, I need you to think carefully. Has Brad ever physically hurt Tyler? Not directly. But Tyler was in the apartment when Brad. She touched her ribs unconsciously, remembering old bruises. When Brad got violent with me, Tyler saw things no child should see. That's grounds for denying visitation, Jake said firmly. No judge is going to award custody to someone with a documented history of domestic violence. You don't understand, Sarah said desperately. Brad's smart. He never got arrested when he hit me because I was too scared to call the police. And he's good at playing the victim. Tells everyone I'm an unfit mother who kidnapped his son. Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he walked to the kitchen drawer where he kept important phone numbers and pulled out a business card that had been there for 2 years. I'm calling Tom Harrison, he said. Sarah looked at him blankly. Who's Tom Harrison? The best lawyer in this part of Montana. He handled my neighbor's custody case when his ex-wife tried to take their kids to California. Jake was already dialing. Tom doesn't lose cases like this. The conversation with Tom Harrison was brief but informative. The lawyer agreed to drive out to the ranch that afternoon to assess the situation. In the meantime, he advised Sarah not to answer any calls from Brad or his representatives. Document everything, Tom had said. Every phone call, every threat, every demand. We're going to need a paper trail. While they waited for the lawyer to arrive, Jake made another decision that surprised even himself. He called his bank and asked to speak with the manager about liquidating some investments. What are you doing? Sarah asked when she overheard the conversation. Making sure you have the best legal representation money can buy, Jake replied. This isn't going to be a cheap fight, and I'm not letting you face it alone. Sarah stared at him with tears in her eyes. Jake, I can't let you do that. This isn't your problem. Yes, it is, Jake said simply. The day I pulled you out of that creek, you became my family. And family protects family. Tom Harrison arrived at 3 o'clock, driving a dusty pickup truck that was more practical than impressive. He was a man in his 50s with graying hair and the kind of calm confidence that came from 3 decades of legal practice in small town Montana. After hearing Sarah's story and reviewing the documentation she had, Tom was optimistic but realistic. The good news is that Montana courts take domestic violence very seriously, he explained. The bad news is that interstate custody disputes can be complicated, especially when the original custody order was issued in Colorado. What are options? Jake asked. Several. First, we file for a protective order here in Montana, which will prevent Brad from coming near Sarah or the children while the case is pending. Second, we petition to have the custody case moved to Montana jurisdiction, since the children have been living here and attending school here. Tom made notes as he talked. Third, we gather evidence of Brad's history of violence and instability. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. Most of the evidence would be my word against his. Not necessarily, Tom said. Medical records, police reports, witness statements. Even if you didn't press charges, there might be documentation you're not aware of. And we'll need character witnesses who can testify to your fitness as a mother and the children's well-being in their current situation. Jake leaned forward. What about my role in all this? Does it help or hurt that they're living with me? Tom studied Jake's face. That depends. What exactly is your relationship with Mrs. Martinez? The question hung in the air, and Jake realized that the assumptions people might make could complicate the legal situation. He and Sarah had been careful to maintain separate bedrooms and appropriate boundaries, but to an outside observer, the arrangement might look suspicious. Mr. Patterson has been incredibly generous, Sarah said quickly. He's provided a safe home for my children and me after our medical emergency. There's nothing inappropriate about our arrangement. Tom nodded. That's good. In fact, it might work in your favor. You can demonstrate that you've provided stability for your children, that they're thriving in a healthy environment. We'll need statements from their teachers, their doctor, anyone who's observed their well-being since they've been here. The meeting lasted 2 hours, with Tom explaining the legal process and the likely timeline. Brad would probably file his custody petition in Colorado within the next few weeks, and they needed to be prepared to respond aggressively. After Tom left, Jake found Sarah sitting on the front porch, staring out at the mountains with a haunted expression. What are you thinking about? He asked, settling into the chair beside her. I'm thinking about running again, she said quietly. Maybe taking the kids and disappearing before Brad can find us. Jake's heart clenched. Sarah, you can't keep running forever. And you can't give Tyler a normal childhood if you're always looking over your shoulder. But what if we lose? What if Brad convinces some judge that he deserves custody? Sarah's voice broke. I can't let Tyler go back to that life. I won't. We're not going to lose, Jake said with conviction he didn't entirely feel. We're going to fight this the right way, with the best lawyer money can buy and every advantage we can get. Sarah looked at him with wonder and gratitude. Why are you doing this? Why are you willing to spend your money, risk your peaceful life, for people who aren't even related to you? Jake was quiet for a long moment, watching thunder graze in the evening light. You know, Mary and I tried for years to have children. When the doctors finally told us it wasn't going to happen, she used to say that maybe God had different plans for us. Maybe we were supposed to be there for children who needed us in other ways. He turned to meet Sarah's eyes. I think this is what she meant. You and Danny and Emma and Tyler, you're not accidents in my life. You're the family I was meant to have. That evening, after the children were in bed, Jake and Sarah made plans. They would be proactive rather than reactive, building the strongest possible case for keeping Tyler safe and the family together. The next morning brought their first victory. Emma bounced into the kitchen with a letter from her new teacher at Millfield Elementary. Mrs. Rodriguez wants to meet with you and Mama, Emma announced to Jake. She says I'm doing really good in math, and she wants to put me in the advanced reading group. Danny had similar news from his 6th grade teacher, and Tyler was adjusting well to kindergarten despite starting 3 weeks into the school year. See? Jake told Sarah as they read the glowing reports from all 3 teachers. The kids are thriving here. Any judge can see that. But their optimism was tested that afternoon when Agent Morrison from Child Protective Services made another unscheduled visit. This time he wasn't alone. He brought a social worker from Colorado who'd driven up specifically to evaluate the Martinez family's living situation. Janet Kowalski was a stern woman in her 40s who made it clear from the beginning that she was skeptical of the arrangements at the ranch. She interviewed each family member separately again, this time with more pointed questions about Jake's relationship with Sarah and his motivations for housing the family. "Mr. Patterson," she said during his interview, "don't you find it unusual for a single man to take in a woman and 3 children he barely knows?" "I find it unusual that more people don't help their neighbors when they're in trouble," Jake replied evenly. "And you expect nothing in return? No ... companionship? No domestic services?" Jake felt his temper flare but kept his voice calm. "Ma'am, I expect my guests to be respectful and to contribute what they can to the household. Mrs. Martinez helps with cooking and cleaning because she wants to, not because I've demanded it. And if you're implying something inappropriate about my relationship with Mrs. Martinez, you're way off base." The social worker made notes without changing her expression. "Mr. Patterson, I'm sure you believe your motives are pure. But from the state of Colorado's perspective, we need to ensure that Mrs. Martinez isn't being coerced or manipulated in any way." When the interviews were over, both social workers huddled together on the front porch for a conference that seemed to last forever. Jake could see Sarah growing more anxious by the minute, her hands beginning to shake again despite her medication. Finally, Agent Morrison approached them with the results. "Miss Kowalski will be filing a report with the Colorado Department of Human Services," he said carefully. "However, based on my own observations and the children's statements, I see no evidence of coercion or inappropriate conduct. The children appear healthy, happy, and well cared for." It was a qualified victory, but a victory nonetheless. As the official vehicles disappeared down the ranch road, Jake put his arm around Sarah's shoulders, the first time he'd done so. "Since she'd arrived, we're going to be okay," he said. "All of us." Sarah leaned into his embrace, drawing strength from his certainty. "I hope you're right." "I am right," Jake said firmly. "This is our home, and nobody's taking it away from us." In the distance, Thunder lifted his head and whinnied, as if agreeing with his master's declaration. The ranch had been tested today, but it had held strong. The real battle, however, was still to come. The first sign of real trouble came at 3:47 a.m. on a Friday morning when Rex started barking with an urgency Jake had never heard before. The border collie was usually quiet during the night, but now he was standing at the front door, hackles raised, issuing sharp warning barks that cut through the darkness. Jake grabbed his rifle from the gun cabinet and peered out the living room window. In the pale moonlight, he could see a dark pickup truck parked at the end of his driveway, just outside the reach of his security lights. The truck's occupants weren't getting out, just sitting there, watching the house. Sarah appeared at the top of the stairs in her robe, her face pale with fear. "Is it him?" she whispered. "I don't know," Jake replied, though his gut told him it probably was. "Get the kids into the back bedroom and keep them quiet. Lock the door." Jake called the sheriff's department from his landline, reporting suspicious vehicles on his property. Deputy Maria Santos, whom Jake had known since she was a girl, promised to send a patrol car immediately. By the time the deputy arrived 20 minutes later, the truck was gone. But its message had been received loud and clear. Brad Hutchinson was in Montana, and he was letting them know he could reach them anytime he wanted. "We'll increase patrols in this area," Deputy Santos promised as she filled out her report. "But Jake, if this guy is as bad as you say, you might want to consider some additional security measures." The next morning, Jake was on the phone with a security company in Billings, arranging for motion sensor lights and surveillance cameras to be installed around the ranch house. Sarah watched him make the arrangements with growing guilt written across her face. "This is all my fault," she said when he hung up. "I've brought danger to your home." "No," Jake replied firmly. "Brad brought danger to my home. You brought hope and happiness. There's a difference." But privately, Jake was more worried than he let on. Men like Brad Hutchinson were unpredictable, and the presence of children in the house made every decision more complicated. He found himself checking locks he'd never bothered with before and keeping his rifle closer at hand. The tension affected everyone. Danny started having nightmares again, waking up screaming about the bad man coming to take Tyler away. Emma became clingy, reluctant to let her mother out of sight. Even Tyler, despite his young age, seemed to sense that something was wrong and asked repeatedly why they couldn't go play outside anymore. 3 days after the midnight visit, Tom Harrison called with news that made everyone's blood run cold. "Brad filed his custody petition in Denver yesterday," the lawyer reported during a conference call with Jake and Sarah. "He's claiming that you've kidnapped Tyler and are living with a man who hasn't been properly vetted by Child Services. He's requesting immediate temporary custody, pending a full hearing." Sarah's face went white. Can he do that? Can a judge just take Tyler away based on Brad's word? "Unfortunately, yes," Tom replied grimly. "Colorado has issued a preliminary order requiring Tyler to be returned to Denver within 10 days for a custody evaluation. If you don't comply, they'll issue a warrant for your arrest on kidnapping charges." Jake felt rage building in his chest. "That's insane. Tyler's safe and happy here. How can any judge ignore that?" "Because Brad has convinced the Denver court that Tyler is in danger," Tom explained. "He's produced witnesses who claim Sarah is unstable and that you, Jake, are an unknown quantity who could be a threat to the child." Sarah stood up abruptly, pacing to the kitchen window. "What kind of witnesses? Who would say those things about me?" Tom's voice was gentle but direct. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Did you ever have any problems with drugs or alcohol? Any mental health issues that resulted in hospitalization or treatment?" Sarah's silence stretched long enough to make Jake's heart sink. "I was hospitalized once," she finally admitted, not turning around from the window. "Right after Tyler was born. I had postpartum depression, and Brad... he made it worse. He told me I was crazy, that I was a bad mother. I started having panic attacks, couldn't sleep. My doctor put me on medication and recommended counseling." "Did Brad ever use this against you before?" Tom asked. "Every time I tried to leave him," Sarah said bitterly. "He'd threaten to tell social services that I was mentally unstable, that I'd been in a psychiatric facility. He twisted everything to make it sound like I was dangerous to my own children." Jake crossed the kitchen and put his hands on Sarah's shoulders. "That was medical treatment for a common condition. It doesn't make you unfit. Try explaining that to a judge who's being fed lies by Brad's lawyer." Sarah replied, leaning back against Jake's chest for support. Tom's voice came through the phone, calm and professional. "This actually gives us something to work with. If we can document the pattern of emotional abuse and manipulation, including Brad's use of your medical history as a weapon, it strengthens our case. But we need to act fast." The next week was a whirlwind of legal preparation. Tom brought in a child psychologist from Billings to evaluate Tyler and his siblings, documenting their emotional health and stability. Dr. Patricia Williams spent 3 days at the ranch, observing the family dynamics and conducting gentle interviews with all 3 children. Her report was unequivocal. The Martinez children were thriving in their current environment, showing no signs of abuse, neglect, or psychological distress. In fact, Tyler showed marked improvement in several areas since arriving at the ranch, sleeping better and displaying more confidence than the withdrawn child who had left Denver months earlier. Meanwhile, Jake underwent his own evaluation. The court had questioned his suitability as a guardian figure, So Tom arranged for comprehensive background checks, character references, and psychological evaluation. Jake's military service record, his standing in the community, and his financial stability all worked in their favor. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Patricia Rodriguez, Tyler's kindergarten teacher, had been observing the boy for 6 weeks. When Tom interviewed her for a character statement, she provided information that would prove crucial to their case. Tyler was very withdrawn when he first arrived, she explained during a deposition that Tom recorded. He wouldn't speak above a whisper, and he flinched whenever anyone raised their voice, even in play. But over the past month, he's become a different child. He laughs, he participates in class activities, he's made friends. She paused, looking directly at the camera. In my 23 years of teaching, I've seen many children from troubled homes. Tyler Martinez is not a child in distress. He's a child who's finally found safety and stability. Similar statements came from Danny and Emma's teachers. From Dr. Elena Vasquez, who had treated a minor injury Emma sustained while learning to ride, and from half a dozen ranchers and business owners in Millfield who had interacted with the family. But Brad wasn't giving up without a fight. His lawyer, a sharp-dressed man from Denver named Richard Kellerman, began filing motions to discredit every piece of evidence Tom presented. He questioned Jake's motives, Sarah's mental health, and even the qualifications of the Montana professionals who had evaluated the family. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when Sarah found a note tucked under the windshield wiper of Jake's truck. Written in Brad's familiar handwriting, it contained just 4 words: "I'm watching you both." Jake took the note directly to Deputy Santos, who had become their primary contact with local law enforcement. This time, she took the threat more seriously. "This escalates things," she said, photographing the note as evidence. "We're dealing with stalking behavior now, not just custody disputes. I'm going to request a restraining order and increase patrols around your property." But Jake knew that restraining orders were just pieces of paper to men like Brad. That evening, he made a decision that would change everything. "I'm going to Denver," he announced at dinner. Sarah nearly choked on her water. "What, Jake, no. It's too dangerous. I'm not going to confront Brad," Jake clarified. "I'm going to meet with his ex-employers, his former neighbors, anyone who might be willing to testify about his character. Tom can arrange depositions, but sometimes you need to look people in the eye to get them to tell the truth." Danny looked up from his plate. "Can I come with you?" "Absolutely not," Sarah said immediately. "But I know where Brad used to work," Danny insisted. "I know which neighbors saw him hit Mama. I could help." Jake looked at the 12-year-old's determined face and saw courage that reminded him of his younger self. "Son, I appreciate the offer, but your job is to stay here and take care of your mother and siblings. That's more important than anything I'm doing in Denver." Sarah reached across the table and took Jake's hand. "Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't do anything that could make this worse." "I promise," Jake said, though privately. He wasn't sure what he'd do if he came face to face with the man who had terrorized his family. 2 days later, Jake was driving through the outskirts of Denver, following an address Tom had provided for Brad's most recent workplace. The city felt claustrophobic after weeks of Montana's open spaces, and Jake found himself missing the ranch before he'd even begun his investigation. Brad's former supervisor at the auto repair shop was a gruff man named Carl Mitchell who wasn't initially inclined to talk to a stranger asking questions about a former employee. But when Jake explained the situation, carefully, without revealing too many specifics, Carl's demeanor changed. "Look, I don't usually get involved in personal stuff," Carl said, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. "But Brad Hutchinson was bad news. Good mechanic when he was sober, but he had a temper that scared everybody here." "Did he ever mention his son or the boy's mother?" Carl's expression darkened. "All the time. always complaining about his crazy ex who was keeping his kid away from him. But the way he talked about her... Carl shook his head. Man shouldn't talk about the mother of his child like that. Made my skin crawl. Jake felt his anger building, but kept his voice level. Would you be willing to make a statement about what you observed? For a court case? Carl considered this for a long moment. You know what? Yeah, I would. I got a daughter myself, and if someone was treating her the way Brad talked about treating that woman, I'd want people to speak up. The pattern repeated itself throughout Denver. Brad's former landlord remembered domestic disturbance calls. A neighbor recalled seeing Sarah with bruises that she tried to hide with makeup. A bartender at Brad's regular hangout described violent outbursts and threatening behavior. Most damning of all was Brad's former co-worker, a young mechanic named Jimmy Torres who had witnessed Brad's reaction when Sarah finally left him. He went completely crazy, Jimmy told Jake during their recorded interview. Smashed up his own apartment, threw tools around the shop, kept talking about how he was going to make her pay. Said she'd never be able to hide from him, that he'd find her, no matter where she went. Jimmy looked directly into the camera. I got a wife and kids of my own, and if Brad Hutchinson came anywhere near them, I'd call the police immediately. That guy is dangerous. Jake spent 3 days in Denver, collecting statements and evidence that painted a clear picture of Brad Hutchinson as an abusive, unstable man who had systematically terrorized Sarah and her children. By the time he drove back to Montana, Tom had enough ammunition to mount a strong defense, but as Jake turned into his ranch driveway late Friday evening, he found Deputy Santos waiting for him with news that made his blood run cold. Brad Hutchinson was arrested this morning for violating the restraining order, she reported. We caught him on your property around dawn, trying to look through your windows. Jake's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Is everyone okay? Sarah and the kids? They're fine. Sarah handled it like a pro, spotted him on the security cameras you installed, called us immediately, and got the kids into the safe room. You set up. We had him in custody within minutes. Relief flooded through Jake, followed immediately by a new surge of anger. How long will they hold him? That's the problem, Deputy Santos said grimly. He made bail this afternoon. His lawyer argued that he was just trying to see his son, that the restraining order was an overreach. The judge set bail at $50,000, and somebody posted it immediately. Jake stared at her in disbelief. So he's free. Can he come back here? Not legally. The restraining order is still in effect, and now he's got criminal charges for violating it. But Jake... Deputy Santos met his eyes seriously. Men like this don't always respect legal boundaries. You need to be ready for anything. As Jake walked toward his house where warm lights glowed in every window and his makeshift family waited for his return, he realized that the real battle was just beginning. Brad Hutchinson had shown his hand. He was willing to break laws and risk arrest to get what he wanted. But Jake Patterson had something Brad didn't understand: a family worth fighting for, and the determination to protect them at any cost. The war for Tyler's future was about to begin in earnest. Judge Thornton entered the courtroom at exactly 9 o'clock, her expression unreadable as she took her seat behind the bench. Jake felt Sarah grip his hand so tightly her nails drew blood, but he didn't flinch. After everything they'd been through together, a little pain was nothing. After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence presented, Judge Thornton began, her voice carrying the weight of a decision that would shape a child's entire future. This court finds itself faced with a complex situation involving competing claims about what constitutes the best interests of Tyler Martinez. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs as the judge continued. The petitioner, Mr. Hutchinson, has biological ties to the child and claims a desire to provide stability and guidance. However, the evidence presented regarding his history of domestic violence, substance abuse, and recent stalking behavior raises serious concerns about his fitness as a custodial parent. Brad's face flushed red, and Jake saw his hands clench into fists on the table. Even now, the man couldn't accept responsibility for his actions. Conversely, Judge Thornton continued, the respondent, Mrs. Martinez, has demonstrated consistent care for her child's well-being. Her decision to seek treatment for postpartum depression shows responsibility, not unfitness. The allegations of kidnapping appear unfounded given the evidence of domestic violence that motivated her departure from Colorado. Sarah's breathing became shallow, and Jake squeezed her hand reassuringly. As for Mr. Patterson's role in this situation, the court finds no evidence of impropriety or ulterior motives. The testimony clearly indicates that his involvement has benefited the child immeasurably. Judge Thornton paused, looking directly at Tyler, who sat between Sarah and Emma in the front row. Most compelling is the testimony of Tyler himself. This court has rarely seen a child speak with such clarity about his own well-being. Tyler's words about feeling safe, loved, and part of a family cannot be dismissed or overlooked. Jake felt a surge of hope, but he knew the judge wasn't finished. Therefore, this court hereby denies Mr. Hutchinson's petition for custody. Furthermore, given the documented history of domestic violence and the recent violation of a restraining order, Mr. Hutchinson's visitation rights are suspended pending completion of a comprehensive anger management program and psychological evaluation. The courtroom erupted. Sarah collapsed against Jake's shoulder, sobbing with relief. Danny and Emma cheered from their seats, while Tyler looked confused but happy to see his mother smiling. Brad shot to his feet, his face contorted with rage. "This is impossible. He's my son. You can't just give him to some stranger." "Mr. Hutchinson," Judge Thornton said sternly, "you will control yourself in my courtroom or be held in contempt." "But," Brad was beyond reason, "I'll appeal this. I'll fight this forever. That boy belongs with me." Two bailiffs moved toward Brad as his lawyer tried unsuccessfully to calm him down. The mask of respectability had finally slipped completely, revealing the violent, controlling man underneath. The court also grants Mrs. Martinez's request for a permanent protective order, Judge Thornton added, her voice cutting through Brad's outburst. "Mr. Hutchinson is prohibited from contacting Mrs. Martinez or her children by any means, and from coming within 500 feet of their residence." As the bailiffs escorted a still ranting Brad from the courtroom, Jake realized it was truly over. The family that had formed around a desperate rescue at Clearwater Creek would remain intact. The drive back to the ranch took on a celebratory atmosphere, with the children chattering excitedly about their victory and making plans for their future in Montana. But Jake noticed Sarah remained quiet, staring out at the passing landscape with a thoughtful expression. "What's on your mind?" he asked during a stop for gas. Sarah turned to him with tears in her eyes, but this time, they were tears of gratitude rather than fear. "I keep thinking about that day at the creek. If you hadn't been there, if Thunder hadn't been so sure-footed, if you hadn't been brave enough to come into that water, ... But I was there," Jake interrupted gently, "and so was Thunder. And so were three of the bravest kids I've ever met. We were meant to find you," Sarah said with conviction. "All of this, the accident, the rescue, even Brad finding us, it was all leading to this moment." That evening, back at the ranch, they celebrated with a dinner that Sarah insisted on cooking, despite Jake's protests that she should rest. The children helped set the table with Mary's good china, treating the meal like the special occasion it was. As they sat around the kitchen table, the same table where Jake had eaten alone for 15 years, he looked at each face illuminated by candlelight and felt a completeness he'd never thought possible. "I have something to say," Danny announced, standing up with the formality of someone making an important speech. "Jake, you saved our lives. Not just Mama's life in the creek, but all our lives. You gave us a home when we didn't have one, And you fought for us when we couldn't fight for ourselves." The 12-year-old's voice cracked with emotion. "I know. I'm not your real son, but could I maybe call you Dad sometimes?" Jake felt his throat constrict with emotion. "Son, there's nothing maybe about it. You've been calling me Dad in your heart for weeks now. It's about time your voice caught up." Emma jumped up and threw her arms around Jake's neck. "Does that mean you're really going to be our dad? Forever?" "Forever and a day," Jake promised, hugging her tight. Tyler, not to be left out, climbed onto Jake's lap. "And Thunder's going to be my horse forever too, right?" "Thunder's getting old, partner," Jake said with a smile. "But I think it's time we found you a horse of your own." 6 months later, on a perfect spring morning that reminded Jake of the day he'd first heard children's voices calling for help, the Broken Arrow Ranch hosted its first wedding in 50 years. Sarah walked down an aisle formed by hay bales and wildflowers, wearing Mary's wedding dress that had been carefully altered to fit. Jake waited at an altar decorated with horseshoes and Montana wildflowers, wondering how he'd gotten so lucky twice in one lifetime. The ceremony was small, just family, close friends like Dr. Elena Vasquez and Tom Harrison, and half the population of Millfield, who had adopted the Martinez family as their own. Even Harold from the pharmacy was there, beaming as if he'd personally arranged the whole romance. Danny served as Jake's best man, wearing a Western suit and a smile that could have lit up the entire valley. Emma and Tyler served as ring bearers, walking Thunder down the aisle with the rings tied to his bridle, a touch that was pure Tyler's idea. As they exchanged vows, Jake thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had started with a desperate rescue, continued through legal battles and sleepless nights, and culminated in something that felt like a miracle. "I promise to love your children as my own," Jake said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, "to protect this family with everything I have, and to make sure Thunder always has extra carrots in his feed bucket." The last line drew laughter from everyone, especially Tyler, who took his responsibilities as Thunder's primary caretaker very seriously. When Sarah spoke her vows, her voice was strong and clear, the voice of a woman who had found her place in the world. "I promise to build a life with you that's worthy of the courage you showed that day at the creek," she said. "To love you not just as my husband, but as the father our children always needed." As they kissed to seal their union, Jake heard Thunder whinny in the distance, as if the old horse was giving his approval to the proceedings. The reception lasted until well after dark, with dancing on the porch and stories shared around a bonfire. Jake found himself watching his new family, Danny teaching some of the local kids how to rope fence posts, Emma showing off her latest artwork, Tyler falling asleep in the lap of Mrs. Rodriguez, who had become like a grandmother to him. Later, as the guests departed and the children were tucked into their beds, Jake and Sarah sat on their front porch, looking out at the land that had become home to all of them. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if things had gone differently that day?" Sarah asked. Jake considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But then I remember what my Mary used to say. Don't waste time wondering about the roads you didn't take. Just make sure you're grateful for the one you're on." Sarah leaned against his shoulder, and Jake felt the contentment that comes from a life lived fully and well. "I'm grateful," she said softly, "for all of it. Even the scary parts that led us here." In the distance, Clearwater Creek continued its eternal journey toward the Missouri River, carrying spring snowmelt and the hopes of everyone who lived in its valley. But it would never again sound dangerous to Jake's ears. Now it sounded like the beginning of everything good in his life. Thunder nickered softly from the corral, probably dreaming of the dramatic rescue that had started it all. The old horse was enjoying his retirement, spending his days teaching Tyler to ride and accepting treats from his adoring young partner. As Jake and Sarah prepared for bed in the house that now held the sounds of a complete family, Jake thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. A children's ball floating in dangerous water. A rancher mending fence at exactly the right moment. A horse brave enough to enter a raging creek. But mostly, he thought about the words that had changed his life forever. Mama's in the river, and we can't swim. Those words had led to the greatest rescue of his life. Not just pulling Sarah from the water, but pulling his own heart back from the loneliness that had threatened to drown it. Sometimes the best things in life begin with someone crying for help. And sometimes, if you're lucky enough to be listening, you get the chance to answer that cry and discover that in saving someone else, you've saved yourself too. The Broken Arrow Ranch was whole again, filled with the laughter of children and the love of a family that had been forged in crisis and tempered in courage. And Jake Patterson, who had spent 15 years believing his chance at happiness had passed him by, had learned that it's never too late for a second chance at everything that matters. In the morning, Tyler would wake up early to help with the horses. Danny would check the cattle with the expertise of a born rancher. Emma would practice piano while breakfast was cooked. And Sarah would start another day as the heart of a family that had found its way home. But tonight, as Montana stars wheeled overhead and Clearwater Creek sang its ancient song, the Broken Arrow Ranch rested in perfect peace, sheltering a love story that had begun with a rescue and would last for all the years to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.